What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekoWhat video, and in this video I'm going to be building a budget gaming PC build for 2021. If you've got between $500 and $600 to spend on an awesome system for entry-level 1080p gaming, this is the video for you. I'll not only be running through all of the components and how I managed to pick them up in budget, I'll be covering off the entire build process, showing you what to do step by step from start to finish, installing Windows, sorting the BIOS and the drivers before booting the machine up and testing it out with some of my favourite titles and some of your guys' favourite titles too. Before you do that though, make sure to get subscribed if you aren't already, but let's do this after a quick ad from today's video sponsor. The latest range of Netgear Nighthawk routers are now available at eBuyer, with support for the latest Wi-Fi 6 tech, which provides incredible network speeds alongside powerful processing and great signal strength. It's awesome for staying online with low latency all of the time. I've taken a look at the AX6, AX12 and XR1000 over on the eBuyer YouTube channel and been super impressed. Strong signal strength and the legendary Duma OS on selected routers make them perfect for gamers out there. Learn more at the video in the cards section now, and the links to eBuyer at the top of the description below. Looking at the parts for this build to begin with, we've got some really strong components today. Whether it's AMD's Ryzen 3 3100, which is a superb quad-core budget CPU that's finally back in stock, hallelujah, to MSI's budget-oriented B550M Pro VDH. This is an awesome budget motherboard with support for overclocking of both your memory and your CPU. It will also support our 3100 out the box with no need for any BIOS updates or anything scary like that. It's got a great feature set, and yes, it's pretty plain, it's pretty bare bones, but it does the job nicely and won't impede on our performance today. Power is provided by Cooler Master's super budget friendly MWE500. This is the cheapest power supply I'd probably recommend, but the graphics card we have today doesn't use basically any power at all. In fact, it solely runs off the lane on the motherboard, meaning you don't need any extra GPU power connectors, which this unit does still have for future upgrades, but it keeps us on the safe side. As far as memory is concerned, I've got a brand new kit from Corsair. This is their Vengeance RGB RT. It's Ryzen certified memory with speeds up to 3600 MHz on this particular kit. That's perfect for the build today. You don't need any higher than that, but go any lower and you will see a performance hit. In fact, check out this side-by-side gameplay from this build with our Ryzen memory first at about 2133 MHz and then at 3600 MHz. The FPS difference is very real. Storage is provided by Seagate's Barracuda Q1. It's a 2.5-inch super budget drive. If you've got more cash, I'd say storage isn't a bad place to spend that money. Something like Seagate's Firecuda 510 or a Kingston Gen 3 NVMe drive are great bets. For the graphics card, I've got a GTX 1650 non-super. Now, buying a GPU in 2021 is, wow, it's about impossible, but finally we appear to be getting somewhere. Now, yes, GPU supply is still pretty poor for 30 series, but if you're in the market for a budget card, 1650s can be found new for around $200. You really do have to shop around, but what I'll say is you don't need to get super lucky to find one at this price point. You can definitely do so. eBay is also a good bet if you don't mind used cards, but I've seen multiple new examples in the UK and the US at the 200 mark. I'll put some links for various different sites that we've found stock on below, but obviously you guys clicking on them and buying them will reduce that stock. So just be patient and make sure you shop around because it is there, at least for the uber budget cards out there. Finally, the last component today is our case. I'm a massive, huge, ginormous fanboy of the Deepcool MA-Cube 110. They sent one out for like a video ages ago and I just keep using it. Alongside the Techwear kind of budget option and the Cooler Master MB320Al, this is one of the best budget cases I've ever seen. Airflow could probably be improved a little bit, but you'll find for a build like this, temperatures are still pretty good. The case looks great as well with white and black colorways available, and a tempered glass side panel, solid build quality, and a stupidly good price point make it the perfect choice. How do we actually go about putting this system together though? Well, let's round up the motherboard, our processor, our RAM, RAM or our memory, and this, the stock cooler that comes included with your Ryzen 3 CPU. This is one of the best things that AMD do, is actually including a really good stock cooler. The Intel ones just aren't good enough for me to do the same in a video like this one. Your motherboard will come packaged up in a nice little anti-static bag. You won't need to use this again, but do keep it safe for the rare occasion that your motherboard is, say, faulty and you might, need to send it back. Grab the motherboard out of the box. This is really cool, actually. It's got a heatsink for the M.2 drives, something is not often seen on super budget boards, so awesome work, MSI. And also take out your included rear I/O shield. You'll need to pop this into the case before any other step, so get it out now, and it's a good gentle reminder to have on your building table or work surface or workbench or PC building station throughout the course of not just your video, but the process. So the motherboard here, we just need to worry about a couple of things. The CPU socket's obviously the main one, as this is where the processor is going to go, and then these black plastic brackets where the CPU stock cooler is going to be installed. We'll come back to these in a second, but first, the processor. Locate the little golden triangle on the processor itself, and you want to match this up with the plastic triangle on the CPU socket. So for us, it's actually on the top left-hand side of this motherboard. Lift the arm on your CPU upwards, a little something like this. Then go ahead and just line those triangles up, drop the processor into place. If you like, you can give it a little bit of a wiggle before popping the arm back down, and we're basically good to go. We're going to install the stock cooler next, but to do this, we actually need to remove these two plastic brackets. I know that might sound a little bit weird, but all will become clear in just a moment. Go ahead and take these plastic brackets off, and then you'll reveal these 4 holes on the motherboard. We're going to use these holes to fasten the cooler down into. Often you will get thermal paste on the bottom of the cooler, but if it's not brand new, just drop a dab of fresh stuff on, and you're basically good to go. The CPU and the cooler are nice and complete. Moving up to the RAM then, and this is probably the easiest part actually of any build as far as installation is concerned. Go ahead and unbox your DIMMs, take them out of the box. These Corsair ones have got this really cool two-tone white and black aesthetic that actually should match up with the case today quite nicely. They just look a little bit unique, and I don't think I'd have ever expected this from Corsair, but I'm not complaining. I think they look really, really cool. PC components are definitely getting more colourful lately, as you'll see in one of our recent Cooler Master videos. You can check out, if you haven't already, in the cards section now. What you want to do is go ahead and find the notch on the RAM DIMM itself and line this up with the corresponding notch on the RAM DIMM slot. This isn't in the middle, it's slightly off center, even though it might not look it, so just watch out for this and be careful. Pull back the clips then on the second DIMM slot and then the fourth DIMM slot. Line up your DIMM itself, apply a bit of pressure to each side, and the DIMM will slot very nicely into place. Simply repeat for as many of your DIMMs as you've got, in our case 2 in every other slot, and the motherboard assembly is nicely wrapped up. What we can do now is actually preempt the next step of the build process today. We want to locate each of the standoff holes through the motherboard. So in our case, we've got 3 up here at the top, we've got a further 3 across the middle, and then we've got 2 sort of at the bottom, but these are actually on different levels. These are the holes we're going to use to screw the motherboard down, and these will line up with the corresponding holes in our case, which you will be able to see if I just pop the side panel off our lovely, beautiful Deepcool MA Cube 110. So you've got 3 at the top, 3 across the middle, and then 2 at the bottom on slightly different levels. Perfect. This next step of the process is definitely easier if you go ahead and lay the case down flat. Before we actually pop the motherboard in, we've got our pesky I/O shield that we mentioned earlier, which needs to pop in to this square in the case itself. The audio ports should be located at the bottom, so basically closest to where the power supply is in your case, with your flash BIOS button at the top, right kind of where this white mesh grill is as well. This will provide a really nice basis for you to slot your motherboard through. Once you've slotted it through, simply screw it down with the included screws through all those holes we just pointed out, and your motherboard is installed into the chassis. Next up, we need to install our SSD today. If we'd got an M.2 drive, this would have just gone into the motherboard super easily, but because we've got a 2.5-inch drive, the installation process is a bit different. Included in the case, you get these 4 sort of little posts. These actually screw down into the bottom of a SATA drive and then just basically secure the drive into place. We're then going to use these to put through the 4 rubber grommets at the back of the motherboard tray. This is basically just a friction mount that will hold the drive into place and stop it going anywhere. Truth be told, this is fully solid state. There's nothing that moves, so you could theoretically just basically shove it loosely in the bottom of the case. It's not very clever and it looks a bit ugly, but you aren't actually actually going to cause any damage to the drive. So simply slot this into the pre-included mount, wire it up with a SATA data cable, the other end of which goes to our motherboard, and we'll give it power later when we go ahead and install the power supply, which is actually the next step in this video. When it comes to installing this component, it's actually a really easy process. In fact, with our unit today, the only slightly complicated bit is that we've got all these cables we need to manage and organize, as it's a non-modular unit, meaning you can't just unplug the ones that you don't need. On the bottom of the unit, you'll see you've got a fan, and we need to make sure this fan is next to some ventilation, aka we've got some air able to flow through the power supply. So for us, it means the fan needs to face downwards at the bottom vent. We're then going to fasten it down with the 4 screw hole locations that you see at the back of the power supply, and these will line up with these 4 screw hole locations at the back of the case. To slide the power supply in, screw it down, and then we're going to plug in the cables and wiring before moving on to the GPU, which I know is often the exciting part of any build. And then we're going to go ahead and just wire up some of our key cables and wiring. So you've got the 24-pin motherboard power cable on the right-hand side, our CPU power connector on the top left-hand side, and then of course the SATA power connector to our SSD drive on the back of the case. And that's actually looking really clean. I haven't even done much cable management. With a cable tie or two, I think we should be able to tuck those away very nicely indeed, and I'm super happy with how this is looking. And it moves us on to the final component today. Hallelujah! And that is of course the GPU. I talked about this earlier, but the 1650 really is a great card for the budget gamer out there. It does feel good that we can finally make a $650 build again. Of course, pricing volatility is still huge and a massive pain in the backside, but the fact you can start picking some of these GPUs up at prices that don't feel illegal can't be a bad thing. If 1080p gaming is what you're after in some of the biggest esports games, this card is a superb choice, but it still has the legs and the muscle for AAA titles in 2021 and beyond. Now, of course, it goes without saying something like Cyberpunk is not a very good idea on a GTX 1650, but basically anything else is game. Something like the 1660 Super also provides a huge upgrade if you can find one of those at a reasonable price point too, but keep an eye out for our 1660 Super builds coming to the channel very soon indeed. One of the major advantages of this card is that it doesn't actually require any additional power. In fact, this is basically it. Don't let size deceive you though, it really is a pocket rocket, especially for the price point, and runs solely from the power of our PCIe lane on the motherboard. In order to install this, you just want to push back the clip on the lane itself, and then go ahead and slide the GPU into place. Line it up with the slot, apply a little bit of pressure, and it should click nicely in. We will need to fasten this down with the screw that comes included with the chassis to make sure it's affixed nicely into place before booting the system up to see how well it performs and how good it looks. But first, we need to make sure we've got Windows installed, sort all of our BIOS, drivers, and all that good stuff out. So let's do that first. In order to do this, you need to plug up your now completed system to a monitor. Make sure you plug up to the graphics card, not to the motherboard, as well as a set of peripherals. I'd recommend your keyboard and mouse go into some USB 2 ports if you've got them, rather than USB 3, as these tend to initialize that little bit quicker. You then want to go ahead and turn on your system and mash the delete key on the keyboard. By continually pressing the delete key, we should be automatically directed into our motherboard's BIOS. So giving the monitor a moment just to boot up and the system time to do its thing, here we go, we are straight into the BIOS. This is where we can change a few of our key settings. First things first, you want to go to overclocking. Don't worry, we're not doing anything too complicated here. We're not reprogramming the matrix, I promise you. But what we do need to do is make sure our RAM is running at 3600 megahertz. To do this, you want to go down and make sure that XMP is enabled. By default, it will be disabled. You hit this, turn it on, select profile 1 or 2, doesn't really matter. And then auto should just do all the work for you. If it doesn't, you can jump into here and pick out the exact speed you want. So we want 3600 megahertz, and that's pretty much all we need to do. You then also want to jump up to boot priority, that's this little bar here, and you want to grab your USB stick. If you haven't already, go ahead to the link in the description below and create a bootable Windows USB. Any flash drive is going to work for this. USB 3 will be a bit quicker though, so that's something to consider. What we basically are doing here is forcing the system to boot into our Windows drive and not any SSD or any other storage we've got plugged into the system. So you can see here we can drag our USB stick anywhere in the order. We want the front, a little something like this. We can then hit F10 on our keyboard, which will allow us to save and exit. So you can see here we've got XMP enabled and our RAM frequency has jumped up to 3600 megahertz with the boot drive now our Windows USB. Hit yes and the whole thing will kind of reboot once again, and in theory should jump us into the Windows installation process, which is the next part of today's video. Giving it a couple of seconds. I'm trying to do this in real time so you guys can see exactly what should happen to you. There we go. Monitors come on, HDMI 1. And there's the Windows logo. Lovely stuff. It's going to boot into the Windows installation environment. We're then able to select our language and our territory. So we're going for English United Kingdom. But obviously, if you're in the US or otherwise, choose those options and hit install now. You'll then be prompted to agree to some terms and conditions, choose your Windows version and enter a product key. If you don't have one, like me, just click I don't have a product key and you're able to continue sailing through the process. We're then able to go ahead and select the drive we want to install Windows onto. For us, this is our 500GB storage drive. If you've got multiple drives and you don't know which is which, unplug the ones you don't want to use and leave the one you do, and then that will be the only one on the list. Hit next and wait for this next process to complete. Might take between 10 minutes and 30 minutes depending on the power, speed of your system and the speed of your storage. The last steps of the process are just to confirm your region, agree or disagree to any tracking information, keyboard layouts, all that good stuff. And once you've done that, Windows will do its final little bit of connection and then we're good to go. The final steps then are to install all of our drivers and software utilities. The most important is NVIDIA GeForce Experience. You can get this by searching NVIDIA GeForce Experience, and then it's one universal piece of software that will find the best drivers for basically any modern NVIDIA GPU. Any 16 series, any RTX card is going to be fine. This is the software you want to use. Once you've done that, we're then going to navigate over to the product page for our motherboard and download any of the relevant networking, LAN, RGB, CPU drivers, and all of those that you need will be linked on the support section of your motherboard's webpage. Once you've got this, your motherboard and your GPU are all drivered up and ready to go. We can now take a look at the system's performance, but before we do that, there's one thing we have to do here on the GeekoWatt channel as basically a rite of passage at this point, and that's to see how good the system looks in a customary GeekoWatt montage. I'll see you in a sec, but first, roll that montage. I can't describe to you how happy I am to see a good-looking budget system back on the channel. But now the all-important question of performance. Specifically, is it any good? Well, on your screen now is a summary of all the different gaming benchmarks we ran and the numbers we were able to achieve. The 1650 is a more powerful card than people realise, and I'll actually be delving more specifically into a couple of these titles in a moment. But this gives you a good bird's eye view of the performance you can be expecting. Looking at our focus titles then, let's kick things off with Apex Legends. Here we managed to achieve an average FPS of 75 with strong 90 and 99th percentile results. It is worth noting that if you wanted some more frame rate, you could tune the resolution or the visual fidelity down a touch. But even still, to get 75 FPS on average is not a bad result on a system this cheap. Call of Duty's Warzone is next up, and here once again we got some pretty solid results. Just shy of 60 frames per second, but all of our testing today was done at 1080p, which is the really important bit. 90 and 99th percentile results were also strong, showing consistent frame rates, and as usual, all of our numbers were tested with both MSI Afterburner's Riva Tuner and NVIDIA FrameView. Next up is CSGO. This is a game that we don't test on all of our systems in great detail, but for an esports oriented build like this, it's a really important one to make sure it works. 166 FPS on average gave us some phenomenal results, and is sure to satisfy even the high frame rate esports players out there. The next game on our list today is possibly the opposite of CSGO as far as frame rate goes, and a title that some of you might be confused as to why we've tested. It is of course none other than Cyberpunk. One of the most difficult games to run, it gives you an idea of the worst case scenario. And our worst case scenario today consisted of 48 frames per second on average. Albeit not a great frame rate, but when you compare this to the FPS delivered by even next-gen consoles at 1080p or 4K, this is not a million miles off. I thought as well visually the game was really playable, and if you really want to play Cyberpunk on a budget, I think this is a very doable system to do it on. Next up is Fortnite, easily the most popular title on our benchmark roster, and here at competitive settings, so 1080p low, everything tuned down but the render distance set to far, we managed to achieve an impressive 157 frames per second on average. Fortnite looked visually great on this machine, even at low competitive settings, and the frame rate delivered. GTA 5 is next up then today. You saw a snippet of this earlier on in the video, and here we got 75 frames per second when testing at 1080p in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode. If you'd like to see how this system stacks up against your current system or your laptop or whatever it is you might be using to play your games, set up the benchmark mode in GTA, copy our settings and see what numbers you're able to get. Heck, even pop them in the comments and we'll compare notes. Next up is Overwatch, once again a game we don't test in great detail on all of our systems, but one that seems very applicable to today's video. 114 frames per second on average was a fantastic result and the game looked great. Moving on to Rainbow Six Siege then, the next title today, and once again this was a gaming benchmark special. What I mean by that is it's got a gaming benchmark mode, allowing you guys to compare and contrast some really repeatable results. 115 frames per second on average was a really strong result from our Ryzen 3 and our GTX 1650 powered system. Finally then, the last game today was Valorant. Here we got some pretty impressive numbers. This won't surprise anyone, 166 FPS on average. So actually not that far ahead of Fortnite at competitive settings. With that though, that pretty much wraps up our gaming benchmarks today, and for that fact, the whole video. If you enjoyed this one, you know what to do, give it a big old like rating, make sure to get subscribed to see more from us. Thanks for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.